Candace Hale lifted her champagne flute and turned toward table 14 with the particular smile of a woman who has never once been told no. "Oh, Preston," she said loud enough for 4 tables to hear, "you actually invited the black man in the wheelchair. How very inclusive of you." She let the word sit there. Inclusive. Like a knife laid flat on a dinner table. Technically harmless. Pointed at everything. The laughter came in waves. First her table, then the one behind it. Then she tilted her head, studying Darius the way a person studies a piece of furniture that has been placed in the wrong room. "I mean, look at him. He can't even stand up to shake your hand. What exactly is he here to contribute? Atmosphere?" More laughter. Louder this time. A board member wiped tears from the corner of his eye. And then, as if the first 2 sentences hadn't been enough, as if the room's silence had given her permission to keep going, Candace leaned toward the woman beside her and said it. The third one. The one that made 3 people at nearby tables go completely still. Somebody should have told him just because they let you through the door doesn't mean you belong in the room. She raised her glass, took a sip. At table 14, Dr. Darius Webb, the man whose hands had saved more lives in this city than anyone in that room, did not move. He looked down at the plaque on the table in front of him, the one with the wrong name engraved on it. He had noticed the mistake the moment Preston placed it there. He hadn't said a word. And at the far end of the room behind the champagne station, a woman in a white catering uniform set her tray down on the silver cart. Not quickly, not dramatically, very slowly. Her hands were steady, her jaw was tight, and her eyes fixed on the back of Candace Hale's head were burning with something that had been building for 18 months. Nobody in that room knew what she was about to do. Nobody knew who she used to be. And nobody, not the 2 governors at table 1, not the federal judge at table 6, not the woman still laughing into her Veuve Clicquot, was prepared for what came next. Don't scroll away from this one. Stay with it. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Right now, people are watching this from every corner of this country tonight, and I want to know where you are. And if stories like this one find you at the right moment, subscribe. We're here every single week. The city of Atlanta had a particular kind of morning in February. Not cold enough to be honest about itself, not warm enough to offer any comfort. The sky sat low and gray over Peachtree Street, and the traffic moved the way it always moved at 6 a.m. slowly, reluctantly, like a man being pulled out of a dream he wasn't finished with. Dr. Darius Webb had driven that stretch of Peachtree Street 4,000 times. He knew every light, every turn, every pothole the city had been promising to fix since 2019. He knew the way the road curved just past the Buckhead intersection, where the streetlights threw long orange shadows across the wet asphalt, and where if you were tired enough after a 19-hour shift, the world outside your windshield could begin to look like something from another life entirely. He had been a trauma surgeon at Emory University Hospital for 11 years. 11 years. 4,217 surgeries. 18 residents trained from their first trembling incision to their board certifications. A department that had reduced trauma mortality rates by 31% under his leadership. A number the hospital's annual report highlighted every year in bold type, without ever once printing his photograph beside it. His residents called him the steady one. Not because he was quiet, he wasn't particularly, but because in a trauma bay when everything was moving too fast, and the monitors were screaming, and a family was falling apart, in the corridor outside Darius Webb's hands never shook. Not once. Not in 11 years. Your hands are a gift, his mother had told him when he was 9 years old, watching him disassemble and reassemble a broken clock on the kitchen table of their house in Decatur. You take care of them. You hear me, you take care of them like they belong to somebody else. He had. He always had. Until the night of February 14th. He had left the hospital at 11:47 p.m. after a shift that had begun at 4 a.m. the previous morning. A 17-year-old with a gunshot wound to the chest. A woman from Marietta with a ruptured aortic aneurysm. A construction worker whose left arm had been crushed under a steel beam on a site in Midtown. Darius had saved all three. He had eaten half a sandwich between the second and third case. He had not sat down once between 8 a.m. and 11 p.m. He was driving home on Peachtree Street when the light at the intersection of West Pace's Ferry Road turned green. He pulled forward. The other driver ran the red at 67 miles per hour. A blood alcohol level of 0.19. A Ford F250 that weighed 4,000 pounds more than Darius's Accord. The impact was on the driver's side. Darius's spine absorbed what the door didn't. He was conscious when the paramedics reached him. He remembered that clearly, the cold of the asphalt through his jacket sleeve, where his arm hung outside the window. The smell of something burning. A woman's voice saying, "Sir, can you hear me, sir?" over and over, like a prayer that kept losing its place. He remembered trying to move his legs. He remembered that they didn't move. T6 incomplete spinal injury. That was what the discharge paperwork said 18 days later when they sent him home in a wheelchair with a folder of rehabilitation resources and the name of a therapist who specialized in adjustment to acquired disability. Adjustment. He had spent 38 years building hands that didn't shake, and they were asking him to adjust. The medical world's official position, delivered by 3 separate specialists over the following 4 months, was consistent and unanimous, given the nature and location of the compression. The prognosis for meaningful motor recovery was poor. Wheelchair use was expected to be permanent. No surgical intervention was recommended at this time. At this time. Those 3 words had lived in the back of Darius's mind for 18 months, like a door that was neither open nor closed. He moved back into his father Raymond's house in Decatur. Raymond Webb was 68 years old, a retired high school biology teacher with a vegetable garden in the backyard and a habit of making too much coffee every morning and leaving the extra in a thermos on the counter without saying anything about it. He did not hover. He did not offer unsolicited encouragement. He simply made coffee and kept the garden and drove his son to appointments without once in 18 months using the word inspirational. Darius loved him for that more than he could say. What Darius did not do in those 18 months was answer most of his calls. His former colleagues called. His residents called. The hospital's department head called twice, both times, leaving voicemails that used the phrase, "We miss your expertise," in a tone that made it sound like a line from a form letter. One person he never heard from was Naomi Carter, his best resident, the one he had personally recommended for the trauma fellowship, the one whose hands by her 3rd year moved in a trauma bay with a precision that reminded him of himself at 30, focused, fast, certain. The one whose laugh during the late-night debriefs after the hard cases had been the thing that kept the whole team human. She had not called. Not once. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself a lot of things in those 18 months that he mostly didn't believe. In his coat pocket every day without exception, he carried a photograph. Worn at the edges, slightly creased down the center. Him and Naomi at their residency graduation ceremony. Him finishing his fellowship, her finishing her 1st year. Both of them in white coats, squinting into the Atlanta sun, laughing at something someone off camera had just said. He hadn't looked at it in 6 months. He almost didn't go to the Meridian Gala. Raymond had found the invitation on the kitchen counter, a gold-embossed card from Hale Medical Group, and set it beside the coffee thermos without comment. "I'm not going," Darius said. Raymond poured his coffee. Okay. 3 days later, Darius said, "It starts at 7. Raymond nodded. "I'll wear the blue tie." They didn't discuss it again. And on the evening of the gala, as Raymond helped him into the car, with the quiet efficiency of a man who had learned exactly how much help to offer, and when Darius looked out the window at the familiar streets of Decatur and told himself he was going because a man does not disappear. A man shows up, even when the room was not built for him, even when the invitation was a courtesy and everyone in the building knew it. He did not know, as Raymond pulled onto the highway toward downtown Atlanta, that the woman who had not called him in 18 months was at that exact moment ironing a white catering uniform in a studio apartment 4 miles away. He did not know what she had found in his file, and he did not know that by the end of the evening, the wrong name on that plaque would be the least of Preston Hale's problems. Naomi Carter had learned to iron quickly. Not because she enjoyed it, she didn't, but because in the 18 months since Hale Medical Group had quietly ended her career, she had learned to be efficient with the things she could still control. The temperature of the iron, the crease down the sleeve, the 3 minutes it took to make a uniform look like it belonged on someone who had chosen to wear it. She had not chosen to wear it, but she wore it like she had. That was the difference. 4 years ago, she had been the most promising trauma surgery resident in Emory's program. That was not her own assessment. It was the language used in the written evaluation. Dr. Darius Webb had submitted on her behalf at the end of her 3rd year. Most promising resident in the program's recent history. Surgical instincts that cannot be taught. Recommend for fellowship without reservation. She had kept that evaluation. It was folded in the back of a notebook on her desk, behind her board recertification study materials, behind the stack of journals she read every night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. after her catering shifts ended. She was still a doctor. Technically. Her license was still active, barely maintained through continuing education credits. She completed online at the kitchen table while eating reheated rice. But without hospital privileges, without references, without a single department in Atlanta willing to return her calls, the license was a fact that existed on paper and nowhere else. Preston Hale had seen to that. It had begun 6 months before Darius's accident. Naomi had been in her 4th year of residency, the year you start to feel cautiously like you might actually survive this. She had been working a Thursday evening shift in the trauma bay when she noticed a pattern in the billing records she was required to countersign as the senior resident on duty. Procedures that hadn't been performed. Implants billed at 4 times their catalog cost. Insurance claims for post-operative consultations that, according to the nursing notes, had never occurred. She had flagged it, quietly through the proper internal channels. She had filed a written report with the hospital's compliance office and sent a copy to the department administrator. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Then her schedule changed. She was reassigned from trauma to general surgery rotation, a lateral move that her program director described as broadening her experience. Her access to the billing system was quietly revoked. Her locker in the trauma wing was reassigned. She filed a second report, this time directly to the state medical board. 2 weeks later, she was called into Preston Hale's office. He sat behind a desk the size of a dining table and looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has already decided the outcome of the conversation and is simply waiting for the formality of it to finish. "Naomi," he said. "Not Dr. Carter. Just Naomi." The way men like Preston Hale use first names to remind you of the distance. "I want to talk to you about your future here." Her contract was not renewed at the end of the academic year. The official reason: performance concerns. No specifics, no documentation, no appeal process that wasn't managed by the same department Preston Hale had led for 9 years. She applied to 5 other Atlanta hospitals. 3 did not respond. 1 called for an interview and then canceled the morning of without explanation. 1 offered her a position in their urgent care clinic, not a residency continuation. Not a fellowship, but a walk-in clinic treating sinus infections and sprained ankles at a salary that would not have covered her student loan interest. She had $214,000 in medical school debt. She took the catering job because it paid $23 an hour with weekend premiums, because the shifts were predictable, and because after 8 months of rejection letters, she needed to stop bleeding money and start surviving. She did not stop studying. Every night without exception, she sat at the kitchen table of her studio apartment on the east side of Atlanta and opened her board's review materials and read until her eyes wouldn't focus. Pharmacology, surgical anatomy, neurological assessment protocols. She read the way a person reads when the knowledge is the only thing they still have that nobody can take away. It was during one of those late-night study sessions, 8 months after Darius's accident, that she had come across his case. She had not gone looking for it. She had been reviewing a published case series on incomplete spinal injuries, standard boards material, when one of the cited cases used a set of imaging descriptors that stopped her cold. T6 compression with perilesional hematoma. Post-traumatic fibrosis along the sciatic pathway. MRI findings consistent with complete cord transection, but with one anomaly in the diffusion tensor imaging sequences that the interpreting radiologist had noted and then inexplicably not followed up on. The case was anonymized. But the injury date, the hospital, the mechanism, a high-speed lateral impact, and the age of the patient placed together in her mind, like 4 corners of a photograph she already knew. She had sat at that kitchen table for 40 minutes without moving. Then she had pulled out her board's notebook and written 3 words at the top of a blank page. The hematoma. Missed. She had known from that night forward that the compression on Darius's spinal cord was not the permanent verdict everyone had accepted, that the fibrotic scarring mimicking complete paralysis could be surgically decompressed, that somewhere in a Decatur house a man with the steadiest hands in Atlanta was sitting in a wheelchair he did not need to be sitting in. She had not called him. She told herself she needed to be certain first. She told herself she needed more data. She told herself she would reach out when she had something concrete enough to stand behind. She was still telling herself that on the evening she arrived at the Meridian Grand Ballroom to set tables for Preston Hale's annual charity gala, and saw the name Dr. Darius Webb on the guest list beside table 14. She stood in the service corridor for a long moment, holding the clipboard against her chest. Then she walked into the ballroom and started setting tables, and she told herself, tonight. If there is a moment. Tonight. She did not yet know that the moment would not wait for her to be ready. The Atlanta Meridian Grand Ballroom had been designed at considerable expense to make people feel small in the most flattering way possible. The ceilings were 40 feet high. The chandeliers, 3 of them, each one custom fabricated in Venice, threw a light that was warm enough to be kind to aging skin, but bright enough to catch diamonds. The parquet floor was original, laid in 1931, walnut and cherry, in an alternating chevron pattern that had survived 9 renovations and 1 flood. Preston Hale had rented it for the evening at a cost of $84,000. The Hale Medical Group annual charity gala had been running for 11 years. $1,500 a plate. 380 guests. A 12-piece orchestra in white tie. Magnolias in crystal bowls along the perimeter, replaced every 2 hours by a florist on retainer. The proceeds, after expenses, went to a pediatric cardiology fund that Preston mentioned in every speech, and that received after the venue and the catering and the orchestra and the florist and the event photographer had been paid approximately 11 cents of every dollar raised. Nobody examined that number closely. The chandeliers were very beautiful. Darius and Raymond arrived at 7:15. A young man in a burgundy blazer met them at the accessible entrance, a side door off the main lobby around the corner from the red-carpeted main entrance where the photographers were positioned. The young man was polite and efficient and used the word accommodations 3 times in 90 seconds. Raymond said nothing. Darius said thank you. They were escorted to table 14. Table 14 was positioned at the far left perimeter of the ballroom, adjacent to the corridor that led to the kitchen. It was the last table before the serving station. When the kitchen doors swung open, which they did every 4 to 6 minutes throughout the evening, the sound and the smell of the catering operation came with them. It was not by any measure a table designed for a guest of honor. Raymond looked at the table number, looked at the distance between table 14 and table 1, where Preston Hale sat between 2 governors and a retired federal appeals court judge. Darius, it's fine, Dad. It was not fine. They both knew it. Neither of them said so again. The first hour passed the way the first hour of events like this always passed, slowly with champagne, and the kind of conversation that sounds like communication but contains no actual information. Darius held his glass and watched the room and spoke when spoken to, which was not often. 3 things happened in that first hour that Raymond Webb would describe later to anyone who asked, as the moments he came closest to standing up and saying something he could not take back. The first, a surgeon named Dr. Philip Garrett, a man who had trained for 2 years under Darius, who had called Darius his mentor in 3 separate published interviews, who had sent a flower arrangement to Raymond's house the week of the accident, walked past table 14 on his way to the bar. He made eye contact with Raymond. He smiled. He shook Raymond's hand warmly. He did not look at Darius. Not an oversight. Not a distraction. A choice made in the space of a half-second, visible to anyone watching, and Raymond was watching. Darius did not react. He took a sip of his water. The second, a hospital board member named Gerald Fitch, stopped at the table to speak to Raymond about the vegetable garden. He had apparently read a profile of Raymond in a Decatur community newsletter and spent 4 minutes in engaged, genuine conversation about tomato cultivation and the particular challenges of Georgia clay soil. He was warm. He was funny. He was the kind of man who, in a different context, would have been easy to like. He addressed every sentence to Raymond. At one point, he gestured vaguely in Darius's direction and said to Raymond, "How's he doing? Does he need anything tonight?" As though Darius were an object that had been brought to the event and required maintenance, Darius set his champagne flute down very carefully on the table. "I'm doing well, Gerald. Thank you for asking." Gerald Fitch startled slightly, then laughed a short, embarrassed sound and moved on. The third, the event photographer. He was a young man, maybe 25, with a canvas camera bag and the slightly harried energy of someone working on a per-photo contract. He moved through the room systematically, table by table, capturing the guests for the Hale Medical Group annual report. Darius watched him work. He was good, actually adjusting his angle for each subject, finding the light, making people look like versions of themselves they were happy with. The photographer reached the cluster of tables near the center of the room. Click, click, click. A senator, a neurosurgeon, the wife of a hospital system CEO. He laughed at something someone said. He adjusted a woman's corsage slightly before shooting a small professional kindness. Then he moved along the perimeter, toward table 14. He looked at Darius. His footsteps didn't slow. His camera didn't rise. He walked past, continued to the next table, stopped. Spent 3 minutes photographing a couple Darius didn't recognize. Raymond's hand resting on the tablecloth closed slowly into a fist. "Dad," Darius said quietly. "Don't. Then Preston Hale approached the podium for the evening's first address, and the room settled into the particular attentive silence of people who have paid $1,500 for a dinner and feel they should at least appear to be listening to the speeches. Preston spoke for 12 minutes. He spoke about the mission of Hale Medical Group. He spoke about innovation and community and the legacy of care that the organization represented. And then, near the end, he cleared his throat and said, "Tonight we're also honoring a man whose contributions to trauma surgery in this city cannot be overstated. His record speaks for itself: over 4,000 surgeries, a department he rebuilt from the ground up. Please join me in recognizing Dr. Davis Webb." Applause. Warm, genuine, rolling through the room. Darius pushed his wheelchair toward the podium. Preston met him with a smile and a plaque, a handsome thing, dark wood and brass, engraved with careful precision. Dr. Davis Webb, Lifetime of Healing Award. Preston placed it on the small table beside the podium. He put a hand on Darius's shoulder. He leaned toward the microphone. "Darius, we're so glad you could make it tonight. It's good to see you." Adjusted. More applause. Darius looked down at the plaque. Davis. He had not been called Davis once in 40 years of life. Not by his mother, not by his father, not by a single colleague, patient, or resident in 11 years of practice. He picked up the plaque. He looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then he set it back on the table. He pushed his wheelchair back toward table 14 without a word. Raymond saw his son's face as he returned to his seat. He had seen that face before, once at his wife's funeral, when Darius had held himself together through the entire service, and then sat down at the kitchen table afterward and been very, very quiet for a very long time. It was the face of a man absorbing something he has decided not to let destroy him. Not yet. Across the room at the serving station, Naomi Carter had watched the entire presentation. She had seen the plaque placed on the side table instead of handed over. She had seen Preston's hand on Darius's shoulder. She had seen Darius return to table 14 and set the wrong-named plaque in front of him like a stone. And then the dancing began. And Candace Hale, 3 glasses of Veuve Clicquot into the evening, pushed back her chair and turned toward table 14 with that smile. Candace Hale had a gift for timing. Not the kind of timing that comes from kindness or intelligence, the kind that comes from a lifetime of understanding exactly when a room is most vulnerable to a well-placed word. She had grown up watching her mother do it at dinner parties in Buckhead. She had refined it through 20 years of charity boards and hospital galas and the particular social ecosystem of Atlanta's upper tier, where cruelty that was packaged correctly could circulate through a room like music. She waited until the orchestra had begun its second number, until the first couples had moved to the dance floor and the room had loosened slightly. Drinks refilled conversations, softened attention distributed, until the moment when table 14 was most exposed, most visible from the surrounding tables, most available to become the thing she was about to make it. Then she turned in her chair. "I don't understand," she said to the woman beside her, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, pitched with the particular cadence of someone sharing a private observation that was never actually private, why Preston insisted on inviting him. "It's depressing. Nobody wants to look at that all evening." The woman beside her, whose name was Helen Briggs, and whose husband was Preston's corporate attorney, laughed once, a short, reflexive sound, and then looked at her champagne glass as though she had just remembered something important about it. But the laugh had been enough. At table 12, a retired orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Walter Ames heard it. He set down his fork. He looked at table 14. He looked at Candace. He started to push back his chair. His wife put her hand on his arm. He sat back down. That moment, Dr. Walter Ames, half risen, then seated, would stay with him for the rest of his life. He would tell his daughter about it 6 months later, sitting on the back porch in the early evening, and he would not be able to finish the sentence. Candace took a sip of champagne, tilted her head, studied Darius across the room the way a person studies a piece of furniture that has been placed in the wrong room. I mean, look at him. He can't even stand up to shake your hand. What exactly is he here to contribute atmosphere? This time the laughter was wider. 4 tables. A board member wiped the corner of his eye. A woman from Marietta covered her mouth with her fingertips in the gesture people use when they want to laugh and want to appear to be suppressing it. Senator William Cross, seated at table 3, heard every word. He was a tall man, 62, with the particular posture of someone who had spent decades making himself appear larger than he felt. He stared into his bourbon. He said nothing. At table 6, Judge Patricia Okafor set down her fork. Her face went completely, absolutely still. She did not look at Candace. She looked at Darius. He had not moved. His hands rested on the armrests of his wheelchair, with the careful neutrality of a man who has decided in advance how he will hold himself when the thing he has been dreading finally arrives. Raymond Webb's jaw was a hard line. His right hand flat on the tablecloth, pressed down slowly until his knuckles were white. Raymond. Darius's voice was quiet, even. The voice he used in trauma bays when everything was moving too fast. She's talking about you like you're not in the room, son. I know. I'm not going to... Dad, please. Raymond looked at his son's face. The same face from the kitchen table after the funeral. He pressed his hand flatter against the tablecloth. He did not stand. Then Candace leaned toward Helen Briggs and delivered the third one. The one that caused 3 people at adjacent tables to go completely still, and one woman at table 9 to reach for her phone before her husband touched her wrist and she put it back down. Somebody should have told him, just because they let you through the door doesn't mean you belong in the room. She raised her glass, took a sip, smiled at something her table-mate said. The orchestra played on. 380 of the wealthiest, most educated, most professionally decorated people in the state of Georgia held their drinks at chest height and watched a man who had spent 11 years saving lives in their city be methodically dismantled at a table beside the kitchen door. And not one of them stood up. Senator Cross stared into his bourbon. The liquid hadn't moved in 4 minutes. He was thinking about a speech he had given at an Emory University commencement 3 years ago, in which he had used the phrase, the moral imperative to act, 4 separate times. He was thinking about how good the words had felt coming out of his mouth. He did not stand up. Dr. Walter Ames looked at the tablecloth. His wife's hand was still on his arm, and he had allowed it to stay there, and he would not forgive himself for that for a very long time. At the serving station along the far wall, Naomi Carter had gone completely still. The champagne flute in her right hand was shaking. Not visibly, not enough for anyone nearby to notice, but she could feel it, the fine tremor running from her wrist to her fingertips, the way her body does when it has absorbed something too large to process quietly. She had watched the plaque. The wrong name. Preston's hand on Darius's shoulder. She had watched the photographer walk past table 14 without raising his camera. She had watched Gerald Fitch speak to Raymond for 4 minutes without once looking at Darius. And now she was watching Candace Hale raise her champagne glass above the laughter of 4 tables, while the man who had written most promising resident in the program's recent history in her evaluation file sat at table 14 with his hands flat on the armrests and his face absolutely composed and the wrong named plaque in front of him like an accusation. 18 months. She thought about the notebook on her kitchen table, the 3 words at the top of the blank page, the hematoma. Missed. She thought about every night she had told herself, not yet. Wait until you're certain. Wait until you have something concrete enough to stand behind. She had been certain for 8 months. She set the champagne flute down on the silver cart. She looked at Marcus Lyle, her supervisor, who was watching her from the far end of the serving station, with the expression of a man who already knew what was about to happen and was already calculating the cost of it. She looked back at Darius. He was looking at the plaque. She untied her serving apron, folded it once, then again, then placed it neatly on the edge of the silver cart. Not thrown, not dropped. Folded and placed the way her grandmother had taught her to fold things, because how you put something down tells the world who you are when you're done with it. She smoothed the front of her uniform, and she stepped out from behind the serving station. 60 feet. That was the distance between the serving station and table 14. Naomi had measured it without meaning to, the way surgeons measure things automatically, habitually. The mind cataloging space and distance because space and distance are the difference between a clean field and a compromised one. 60 feet of parquet floor. 12 tables between her and him. 380 people who, at various points in the next 90 seconds, would stop whatever they were doing and turn to watch. She walked at a normal pace. Not fast looked like panic. Not slow looked like performance. She walked the way she had walked into trauma bays for 4 years, purposeful, present, uncommitted to the next 10 seconds, and nothing beyond them. Marcus Lyle caught up with her at the edge of the serving station. His hand closed around her elbow. Carter. His voice was low, tight, the voice of a man managing a situation. Carter, get back behind the station, right now. She looked at his hand on her elbow, then at his face. Let go, Marcus. You walk out there, you're done. I'm not covering for this. I'll make sure you never work another event in this city. I mean it. I know every catering manager from here to Savannah. Then I'm done. He held on for one more second, then released. She kept walking. The first table she passed, table 11-4, hospital administrators went quiet as she moved by. Not because she did anything to draw attention. Simply because a black woman in a white catering uniform walking across a ballroom floor with that particular quality of intention is the kind of thing that human eyes follow without being asked. By table 9, the nearest conversations had trailed off. By table 7, Judge Okafor, who had been watching since Candace's third sentence, straightened in her chair almost imperceptibly. Her eyes moved from Naomi to Darius and back. Preston Hale at table 1 saw her coming. His face didn't change, but his hand resting on the tablecloth moved slightly, an involuntary adjustment, the body reacting to something the expression is not yet willing to acknowledge. He recognized her. Of course he recognized her. He had sat across a desk from her and used her first name like a diminutive, and ended her career with the particular efficiency of a man who has done it before and expects no consequences. She did not look at him. She walked past Candace Hale's table without breaking stride, without turning her head, without giving Candace the acknowledgement of even a glance, which was in its way the most precise thing she could have done. Candace's smile flickered. Just once. Just for a half second. Then Naomi reached table 14. Raymond Webb looked up at her. His expression cycled through 3 things in rapid succession: recognition, confusion, and something that looked cautiously like hope. Darius did not look up immediately. He was still looking at the plaque, the wrong name on the brass plate. Davis. Dr. Webb. His head came up slowly. He hadn't heard that title in 18 months. Not once. Not from a colleague, not from a former resident, not from the 3 specialists who had delivered their verdicts in careful, compassionate, carefully distanced clinical language. Not from anyone. 2 syllables. His title. His name. He looked at her. Naomi. 1 word. Everything in it. 18 months of silence of the phone that didn't ring, of the photograph he hadn't looked at in 6 months. All of it compressed into a single word, spoken very quietly, at a table beside a kitchen door, in a ballroom full of people pretending not to watch. Naomi held his gaze. She did not flinch from what was in it. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one. I'm going to give it to you properly later when we're not in a room full of people. But right now," she took both his hands. His surgeon's hands. The ones his mother had told him belonged to someone else. The ones that hadn't shaken in 11 years, until the night on Peachtree Street, when they had nothing left to hold. She held them. "Right now, may I have this dance?" Darius looked at her, then at his wheelchair, then back at her. "Naomi, I can't. I know what you can't do." Her voice was steady, low. The voice she used in trauma bays, the one that said, "I have assessed this situation, and I need you to trust me for the next 60 seconds. I trained under you for 4 years. I know every case you published on incomplete spinal injuries. I know what the imaging showed. And I think," she paused, "I think you know what I'm about to tell you. I think you've known for a while, and you haven't let yourself believe it." The table was very quiet. Raymond had stopped breathing. "Show me first," Darius said. 3 words. Quiet. The words of a man who has been handed hope before and knows exactly how much it costs when it turns out to be wrong. "Right here, right here." At table 2, Dr. Eleanor Voss, 71 years old, retired chief of neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins in Atlanta for her granddaughter's wedding. Attending the gala, as a courtesy to an old colleague, set down her wine glass. She had been watching since Naomi crossed the serving station. She had watched the walk. She had watched the kneeling. She had watched the hands taken. Now she watched Naomi Carter's face as the young woman nodded once at Darius Webb's request and reached into the small pocket of her catering uniform and removed, of all things, a penlight. Dr. Voss leaned forward in her chair. "Who is that woman?" she asked the man beside her. He didn't know, but Dr. Eleanor Voss, who had spent 40 years learning to recognize the hands of a physician before they had done anything worth watching, already had her answer. She was already reaching for her cane. The penlight was a Welch Allen, small silver, the kind that clips to a coat pocket. Naomi had carried one every day of her residency. It had become habit, the way surgeons develop habits around the tools that keep them oriented, keep them grounded, keep them connected to the work, even when the work has been taken away. She had transferred it every morning for 18 months from whatever she wore the night before into whatever she was wearing that day. White coat to street clothes to catering uniform. It was the last thing she moved and the first thing she checked, and she had never once examined why she kept doing it. She knew why now. "I need you to follow the light," she said. "Both eyes. Don't anticipate, just follow." Darius tracked it. Left, right, up, down. Convergence intact. Pupillary response equal and reactive. Good. She moved to his side. "I'm going to test sensation. Tell me exactly what you feel, not what you expect to feel. What you actually feel." She ran 2 fingers along the lateral aspect of his forearm. "That. Normal." She moved to his hand pressed firmly at the thenar eminence. "That. Normal. Naomi, what are you? I need you to be a patient right now, not a surgeon. Can you do that for 60 more seconds?" A beat. "Yes." She moved lower. His thigh just above the knee lateral surface dermatomal territory of L2 and L3. She pressed. Darius's jaw tightened. "Something," he said, quietly, as if the word cost him something to say out loud. "Something like pressure, like warmth, like something," he said. They told me that was phantom. Referred sensation from intact levels above. I know what they told you. She moved to the lateral calf. S1 territory. Pressed 2 fingers firmly against the skin. Darius said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, there. Raymond Webb made a sound in his throat and pressed both hands flat against the table. Naomi did not react. She moved to the dorsum of his right foot, ran her thumbnail along the plantar surface in the sharp, specific motion of a Babinski test. Darius's toes curled, not a spasm, not a reflex arc from an intact cord firing below a complete lesion. A voluntary pattern response. The kind of response that requires a motor pathway that is open. Naomi sat back on her heels. She looked at his foot for a moment. Then she looked up at him. Darius, his name. Not the title this time. His name the way she had said it during late-night debriefs after the hard cases, when the formality of the trauma bay had dissolved, and they were just 2 people who had spent 15 hours trying to hold the line. Your cord is intact, she said. It has always been intact. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the one that had preceded it. The previous silences in that room had been the silences of people choosing not to speak. This one was the silence of people who had forgotten how. The T6 imaging showed compression, she continued. Her voice was steady, clinical. The kind of voice you use when the information you are delivering is so large that the only way to give it safely is to make it small, precise, sequential. Every radiologist who read your MRI saw the compression and interpreted it as complete cord transection, which is the correct interpretation of that image in isolation. But there was a perilesional hematoma post-traumatic, developed in the 72 hours after impact. It was noted in the diffusion tensor imaging by the reading radiologist and flagged as a possible secondary finding. I never saw that note, Darius said. It was in the addendum, page 4 of the radiology report. The attending who reviewed your final consult. She stopped, looked at him. The attending who signed off on your final consult and determined that no surgical intervention was recommended was Preston Hale. The name landed in the room the way a glass lands on a tile floor. The sound of it spreading outward, reaching tables it had no business reaching. At table 1, Preston Hale's expression did not change. His hand resting on the tablecloth went very still. Hale is a hospital administrator, Darius said. The flatness in his voice was the flatness of a man processing something that is reshaping itself as he speaks. He hasn't practiced clinical medicine in 6 years. I know. He signed a final consult on a spinal injury case he was not qualified to review. Yes. And the hematoma was surgically addressable, is surgically addressable. The compression it created has caused fibrotic scarring along the sciatic pathway that has been mimicking complete paralysis for 18 months. With the right decompression, Voss protocol T5 to T7, the prognosis for meaningful motor recovery is good, said a voice behind her. Naomi turned. Dr. Eleanor Voss was standing 2 feet away. She had crossed half the ballroom on her cane without Naomi hearing her approach. She was 71 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, wearing an emerald gown and an expression that made several people nearby feel they should stand up straighter. She looked at Naomi. Where did you train? Under Dr. Webb, ma'am. 4 years at Emory. Voss looked at Darius, then back at Naomi. Show me the plantar response. Naomi repeated the test. Darius's toes curled again. Voss watched, said nothing for 4 full seconds. Then she turned her head and looked directly across the room at Preston Hale with the specific quality of attention that a person deploys when they have decided that a conversation is going to happen. and the only remaining question is whether the other party will have the dignity to initiate it themselves. Preston Hale looked back at her. He said nothing, which was as Naomi had once said to a resident who asked how to read a difficult attending, always your answer. "Young woman," Voss said, without looking away from Preston. "What is your name?" "Naomi Carter." "Dr. Carter." A correction. Quiet. Absolute. "I trained the team that wrote the Voss protocol. I have reviewed 4,000 incomplete spinal injury cases in 40 years. She paused. "Your assessment is correct." Raymond Webb pressed both hands over his face, and across the room at table 1, Preston Hale picked up his champagne glass and took a long, slow sip, and the steadiness of his hand was the most incriminating thing anyone in that room had ever seen. Judge Patricia Okafor had spent 31 years on the federal bench making decisions that other people spent their entire careers avoiding. She had ruled on cases that made headlines, and cases that didn't, and cases that should have but weren't covered, because the people they affected didn't have publicists. She had learned over 3 decades that the most dangerous moment in any proceeding was not the moment of maximum noise, but the moment of maximum silence, the moment when everyone in the room understood what had happened and was waiting to see who would be the first to name it. This was that moment. She pushed back her chair. She did not hurry. Judge Okafor had never hurried toward a confrontation in her life. Hurrying suggested uncertainty. She walked at the pace of someone who has already decided where she is going and is simply allowing the room time to understand it. She crossed from table 6 to table 1 in 12 steps. Preston Hale looked up at her. He had the expression of a man who has spent 20 years in rooms where his wealth determined the social physics, who approached whom, who waited, who spoke first, and who was now watching those physics fail him in real time. Judge Okafor. His voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of a man buying himself seconds. "Can I get you something? I can have someone bring Mr. Hale." She did not sit down. She stood across the table from him, and her stillness was the kind that fills a room. "I have been sitting in this room for 40 minutes. I watched your photographer walk past Dr. Webb's table without raising his camera. I watched your master of ceremonies announce his award with the wrong name. I watched your wife describe a man who saved 4,000 lives in this city as atmospheric furniture." Preston's lawyer, Thomas Briggs, leaned forward. "Your Honor, with respect, this is a private—" "Mr. Briggs." She didn't look at him. "I will get to you." Briggs sat back. "And now," Okafor continued, "Dr. Eleanor Voss, whose name I suspect you recognize, has confirmed that a surgical consult bearing your signature recommended against intervention for a treatable condition. A condition that has kept one of the finest trauma surgeons in the southeastern United States in a wheelchair for 18 months. The tables nearest to them had gone completely quiet. The orchestra sensing something without being told what had softened its current peace to near inaudibility. That consultum, Okafor said, was outside your clinical qualifications, which means it was either negligence or intent. I'm not a prosecutor, Mr. Hale. I'm not here to charge you with anything tonight." She paused. "But I am a federal judge, and I am a witness. And tomorrow morning I will be making several phone calls." Preston Hale said nothing. His champagne glass was still in his hand. He hadn't set it down since Naomi had spoken his name. Some part of him, Naomi thought, was holding it, because letting go of it felt like conceding the last prop of normalcy. Senator William Cross, 3 seats away at table 1, pushed back his chair. His face had the particular color of a man who has been sitting in a burning room telling himself it was just warm. He stood. His voice, when it came, was not steady. "Amustun." "Preston." One word. The word of a man who has known another man for 20 years and is only now seeing him clearly. Tell me this isn't true. Preston looked at him. The smoothness in his expression cracked, not completely, not dramatically, but in the way expensive things crack a single line, precise, running from one edge to the other. He said nothing, which was, as Naomi had known it would be its own answer. Cross sat back down. He didn't pick up his drink. He stared at the tablecloth with the expression of a man beginning the long, uncomfortable process of deciding what he is going to do about the fact that he stayed in his seat for 40 minutes while someone was publicly destroyed 3 tables away. Thomas Briggs tried once more. He adjusted his jacket, and said, in the voice of a man who has spent 30 years making problems disappear before they could be examined. I think we should all take a breath here. Dr. Voss, with the greatest respect, a ballroom floor assessment is hardly the basis for. Mr. Briggs. The voice came from Dr. Eleanor Voss. She had not raised it. She didn't need to. I pioneered the surgical protocol that bears my name at Johns Hopkins in 1987. I have reviewed 4,000 cases. I have testified before the Senate Subcommittee on Medical Negligence twice. She looked at him with the patience of a woman who has been interrupted by smaller men for 50 years and has outlasted every one of them. Sit down. Briggs sat down. Raymond Webb, who had not moved from table 14 through any of this, reached across and placed his hand over his son's. Darius was looking at Preston Hale. His face had none of the flatness of the earlier hours. Something else was there now. Something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but contained elements of both the way certain compounds contain elements that are only dangerous when combined. 18 months, he said, quietly, to no one in particular. Raymond squeezed his hand. 18 months, Darius said again, not louder, just more certain. Naomi turned from Preston Hale and looked at Darius. She had one more thing to say, and she had been carrying it for 8 months, and it was heavier than the rest. I found your discharge file 8 months ago, she said. I recognized the imaging descriptors in a published case series, and I put it together. I should have come to you the next morning. I should have called you that night. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. I was afraid I was wrong. I was afraid of what it would cost you if I was wrong. I told myself I was protecting you. She stopped. I was protecting myself from the possibility of having raised your hope and been wrong. And I am sorry, Darius. I am so sorry. The room was so quiet you could hear the magnolias floating in the crystal bowls. Darius looked at her for a long moment. You're here now, he said. 3 words, the most generous sentence in the English language. Naomi exhaled. The first real exhale she had taken in 18 months. And across the room at the serving station, Marcus Lyle, who had threatened her career 20 minutes ago, who had told her she would never work another event in this city, was standing very still, watching, and looking like a man who was beginning to understand that some bets are placed on the wrong side of history. Raymond Webb had not planned to speak. He was not a man who sought the center of rooms. He had spent 40 years at the front of high school biology classrooms because he loved the subject, not because he loved the audience. He had raised his son in a Decatur house with a vegetable garden and a coffee thermos, and the understanding that dignity was demonstrated, not announced. He had driven Darius to this gala without asking for anything in return, except the chance to sit beside him in a room full of people who used to know what his son was worth. But he had watched the photographer. He had watched the plaque. He had watched Candace Hale raise her champagne glass above the sound of laughter directed at his son's body. He had kept his hand flat on the tablecloth and his mouth closed because Darius had asked him to. Darius wasn't asking anymore. Raymond stood up. He was 68 years old, And he was not a tall man, and he did not have the commanding presence of a judge or the institutional authority of a neurosurgeon. He was a retired biology teacher from Decatur, in a blue tie that he had pressed himself that morning. The room looked at him anyway. "My son," he said, "got out of bed at 4:30 every morning for 11 years to go save people he had never met." His voice was not loud. It was the voice of a man accustomed to making 28 teenagers understand photosynthesis, clear, unhurried, built for the back row. He saved people whose families had given up. He saved people the previous shift had stopped fighting for. He saved a 17-year-old boy last February 13th, the night before the accident, with a gunshot wound to the chest that 2 other surgeons had called unsurvivable. That boy is a sophomore at Georgia State right now. He looked at Preston Hale. "For 18 months, my son has sat in a chair in my house, and he has not complained once. Not once. He has not asked the world for anything. He came to this gala tonight because I asked him to, because I told him a man does not disappear." Raymond's voice held. "I want the people in this room to understand something. The man you seated at table 14 beside the kitchen door. At the table your photographer walked past, whose name you engraved incorrectly on the award you gave him for saving your city. That man held the line in your trauma bays for 11 years. And when he needed someone to hold the line for him, every single person in this room looked at their shoes. The silence that followed was the specific silence of people who have been seen doing something they cannot take back." Senator Cross's face had gone the color of old paper. Dr. Walter Ames at table 12 pressed both hands over his eyes. Raymond sat back down. He straightened his blue tie. He did not look at anyone. Darius put his hand on his father's arm for a moment. Said nothing. Didn't need to. Then he turned to Naomi. "Tell me what I need to do." Naomi had been waiting for those words. She had been building toward them for 8 months at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning. She had the answer ready the way you have an answer ready when you have rehearsed it so many times it has stopped feeling like rehearsal. "I can't decompress the hematoma tonight," she said. "That requires Voss's team a full OR 7 hours. But I can prove the pathways are open, right now, in this room." "Then prove it." She guided him through the sequence. A targeted series of voluntary activation attempts, not passive reflex testing, but deliberate, effortful motor recruitment, the kind that requires a pathway to be genuinely open, that cannot be faked or mimicked by spinal reflex arcs below a complete lesion. Right hip flexor. Try to lift your knee toward your chest. Not the whole movement, just the intention of it. Darius concentrated. A tremor moved through his right thigh. Small, definitive. Raymond made a sound. Again. Sustained this time. Hold the intention. The tremor became a contraction. The knee lifted 2 inches off the wheelchair footrest and held for 3 seconds before exhaustion dropped it. 2 inches. 3 seconds. The first voluntary motor movement Darius Webb had produced below his injury level in 18 months. Dr. Eleanor Voss, standing 4 feet away, said nothing. She pressed 2 fingers to her lips and said nothing. "Left ankle," Naomi said. Her voice was absolutely steady. "Dorsiflex, toes toward you." Darius's left foot moved. Raymond Webb covered his face with both hands and wept without sound, the specific weeping of a parent who has been holding something impossible for 18 months and has just been allowed finally to set it down. "Okay," Darius said. His voice was different. Something had shifted in it, not broken, not overwhelmed, but altered the way a room is altered when a window that has been painted shut for years is finally opened. "Okay." Naomi looked at him. "I'm going to get you back." "I know." "I should have come 8 months ago, Naomi." He looked at her. The same eyes from the photograph. the once squinting into the Atlanta sun at their residency graduation, laughing at something off camera. "You're here now." Then without announcement, without asking permission from the orchestra or the room or the man at table 1 who had taken everything he could take, Naomi reached out and took both of Darius's hands. "One dance," she said. "The way we said we would after boards. Remember, you promised." A sound moved through him that was not quite a laugh. "I remember. You can't stand. That's fine. We don't need standing." The orchestra, which had been barely playing, which had reduced itself to near silence during Raymond's speech and had not resumed, now did something unrequested, unprompted, and perfect. The conductor, a 60-year-old man named David Park, who had been watching the scene at table 14, with the expression of someone witnessing something he will spend the rest of his life trying to describe accurately, lifted his baton. The first notes of a slow waltz rose into the 40-foot ceiling of the Atlanta Meridian Grand Ballroom. Naomi moved beside Darius's wheelchair, not in front of it, not pushing it, but beside it, one hand in his, the other resting on his shoulder, moving in the slow, dignified, unhurried pattern of two people who have been through something together that most people in the room could not have survived. On the third rotation, Darius's right foot pressed against the footrest. Just once. Just to feel it. Just to remind himself that the floor was there. 380 people watched in complete silence, and not one of them looked away. And when Naomi leaned close to his ear and whispered something that nobody else could hear, and Darius's face for the first time in 18 months became the face Raymond remembered, the face from before Peachtree Street, and the F250 and the wrong name on the plaque. Raymond Webb stopped trying to hold himself together. He let himself cry. Because some things, when they finally happen, deserve to be witnessed by the people who waited for them without giving up. The morning after, the Meridian Gala judge, Patricia Okafor, made 4 phone calls before 8 a.m. The first was to the Georgia Composite Medical Board. The second was to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia. The third was to the director of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, who was an old law school colleague, and who, when she finished describing what she had witnessed the previous evening and what Dr. Naomi Carter had documented in her records, said only, "Send me everything." The fourth was to Dr. Eleanor Voss, who had already been awake for 2 hours and had already drafted a 4-page clinical summary of her ballroom assessment and emailed it to 3 colleagues at Johns Hopkins. "Eleanor," Okafor said, "how quickly can your team move?" "I've already called the OR coordinator," Voss said. "6 weeks if Dr. Webb agrees, maybe 5. He agreed. The investigation into Hale Medical Group's billing practices, the one Naomi had initiated 18 months ago, the one that had cost her a career and disappeared into a compliance office and produced nothing, was reopened within 10 days of the gala. This time with a federal judge as a named witness and a U.S. attorney's interest, it did not disappear. The forensic accounting took 11 weeks. What it found was not subtle. Procedures billed and not performed. Implants invoiced at 3 to 4 times catalog cost. Post-operative consultations claimed on insurance filings that the nursing records showed had never occurred. The total figure across a 6-year period was $23.4 million. Preston Hale resigned as CEO of Hale Medical Group on a Tuesday morning, 31 days after the gala, in a statement issued by Thomas Briggs that used the phrase "to focus on his family" twice and mentioned Darius Webb not once. The board voted him out unanimously 2 days later after the billing figures became public. The federal indictment came 4 months after that. 19 counts. Wire fraud healthcare. Fraud obstruction of a medical board review. Briggs negotiated. Preston cooperated. The cooperation reduced the counts, but not the sentence. He received 7 years. He served 4. Candace Hale's comments from the gala captured on the phones of 3 separate guests and compiled into a single 90-second clip by someone at Table 9 who had reached for her phone before her husband could stop her, and who had ultimately decided that some things are more important than social grace were posted to social media on the morning of the 3rd day after the event. 9 million views in 48 hours. The clip showed the 3 sentences in sequence. The first, the second, the third. It showed the room laughing. It showed the photographer walking past Table 14. It showed the wrong name on the plaque captured in a brief pan legible on screen Davis. The comments section was not kind. Candace issued a statement. Then a second statement clarifying the first. Then a third, drafted by a crisis communications firm, that described her words as deeply regrettable and not reflective of her values. The firm charged $40,000 for the third statement. It did not help. Senator William Cross did not issue a statement drafted by anyone else. He sat at his desk in his office in Atlanta on the morning after the clip went viral, and he wrote something himself. It was not long. I was in that room. I heard what was said. I stayed in my seat. I have spent 30 years talking about moral courage, and on the evening of the Meridian Gala, I had every opportunity to demonstrate it, and I did not. I don't have an explanation that satisfies me. I'm not sure one exists. What I can tell you is that I have called Dr. Webb to apologize personally, and that he was more gracious about it than I deserved. I am going to spend the rest of my time in public life trying to be worth that graciousness. It was the most honest thing William Cross had ever written. It did not save his Senate seat, which he lost in the primary by 11 points. But it was the most honest thing he had ever written, and he knew it, and on some level that was its own currency. Darius's surgery took 6 hours and 40 minutes. Dr. Eleanor Voss led the team. Naomi was in the OR as a scrub observer. She did not yet have hospital privileges at Johns Hopkins, a fact that would be corrected within the month, and she stood at the edge of the surgical field and watched Voss's hands move with the precision of someone who has spent 40 years learning to give people back what they thought they had lost. The decompression was complete. The hematoma, 18 months old, fibrotic and dense, was removed in its entirety. In the recovery room, 4 hours after the surgery, Darius moved both feet when asked. Both. Raymond was there. He had driven to Baltimore 2 days before the surgery and had not gone back to Decatur. He was in the chair beside the bed, and his coffee thermos was on the window ledge. And when Darius moved his feet, Raymond picked up the thermos and held it in both hands and looked out the window at the Baltimore sky for a long time. 4 months later, Darius Webb walked out of the Johns Hopkins Rehabilitation Center on his own 2 legs. Not quickly. Not without effort. Not without the forearm crutches he would use for another 3 months before he didn't need them anymore. But walking. Raymond was there. Naomi was there. Dr. Eleanor Voss, who had driven from her home in Chevy Chase, Maryland, at 6 in the morning to be present, was there. Nobody took a photograph. Nobody needed to. 6 months after that, Naomi's medical license was formally reinstated to full active status by the Georgia Composite Medical Board, with a finding that her original complaint had been substantiated and her non-renewal had been retaliatory. Emory University Hospital offered her the trauma surgery fellowship she had been denied. She declined. She and Darius opened a free trauma clinic in Decatur, Georgia. Uninsured patients, no billing department. Funded by a foundation whose first major donor quietly and without announcement was Senator William Cross. Above the entrance in Raymond Webb's handwriting on a painted wooden sign were 4 words. Come in. We see you. On the first morning the clinic opened, Raymond arrived before either of them. He unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and put a thermos of coffee on the front desk. He did not leave a note. He didn't need to. And on the wall beside the door, in a simple frame, was the photograph from Darius's coat pocket. The one worn at the edges, creased down the center. Him and Naomi at their residency graduation, squinting into the Atlanta sun, laughing at something off camera. Below it, on a small card in Naomi's handwriting, were the words her grandmother had said to her on the morning she left for medical school. How you put something down tells the world who you are when you're done with it, and how you pick it back up tells the world who you decided to become. The room had 400 witnesses that night. Only one of them walked across the floor. Dignity is not something that can be taken from you by a woman with a champagne glass and a cruel mouth. But it can be returned by one person willing to cross a room when everyone else has decided that crossing it is someone else's responsibility. Be the person who crosses the room. If this story found you at the right moment, drop a comment. Tell us where you are and what it made you think about. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. We tell one every week. For the Dariuses, for the Naomis, and for everyone still waiting for someone to finally say, "Come in." We see you.